Thank you, Lisa. So as Lisa mentioned, I'm Lizzie Horridge. I'm the new chair of PRCA Northwest NextGen. So we've just had a bit of a relaunch really of the NextGen. We've not done anything for a couple of years. So this is our first event of the new NextGen. So we've got a committee which consists of people from agencies and in-house teams in the Northwest. So today, for our first event, we're delighted to be joined by Koray Camgoz, who's Director of Comms and Marketing at the PRCA. So please, I'm going to ask him some questions, but please feel free to ask or type in the comments box any questions that you've got. We're also really keen to hear any feedback from you guys as well about any upcoming events that you'd like to see from the PRCA NextGen. So if there's any ideas of events or anything that we can do to support you, then just let us know, because we're really keen to target our activity around what you guys want. So hi Koray, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. So I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about your role at the PRCA.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Lizzie, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So as Lizzie and Lisa mentioned, I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing at the PRCA. So in a nutshell, I suppose my job is to protect and strengthen the PRCA's reputation in the UK and across the world. So I imagine most of you are familiar, but we are a professional body representing PR. We represent around 35,000 professionals across the world. So I suppose my job is to oversee our communication strategy and make sure that we're leading on the issues that our members care about, whether that's mental health or diversity or research and best practice. So yeah, it's a very busy role and a very broad ranging role, but one that I'm enjoying so far.
Great. Okay. And can you tell us a bit more about your career journey and how you got to this current role?
Yeah, so I'm 33 now. So I graduated in 2008, right at the heart of the financial crash. So it was possibly the worst time to graduate, probably similar to what a lot of graduates are going through at the moment. But I graduated, back end of 2008. There were very few jobs everywhere, not just in public relations. I knew I wanted to work in PR. I guess I was attracted to influence. I was really interested in the news, but there were no jobs reachable, and every agency I spoke to and every job that I applied for was out of reach. So I went back to uni the following year and I did a master's in media and communications at Brunel. And then after that, I kind of just undertook a broad range of internships. I worked at the Department of Health, I worked at ActionAid, the charity, and eventually I decided that an opportunity came up for me to go to the United States. So I went to New York and I landed a job with a PR agency focusing on financial and healthcare. So that was kind of my first foray into the industry. A short while after that, about 6 months after that, I came back to London and I joined the CIPR, which is the other professional body for PR in the UK. And I spent 7 years there. I was there for, started in administration and kind of worked in everything from policy, research, and ultimately ended up as PR manager, where I worked for 3 years. And then I joined the PRCA in 2019 as head of comms. So that's a brief overview of how I got here.
Very interesting. So how do you think the PR world has changed then during the pandemic?
I think it's changed. Yeah, I think it's changed massively. I mean, there are the practical changes which all businesses have had to adapt to, the virtual working and the culture change. But I think that our industry in particular has adapted really, really well. We have proved to be very creatively resilient in the way that we've dealt with a lot of the challenges. There's no beating around the bush that the industry has suffered. So about half of our members, unfortunately, had to make redundancies. But in the grand scheme of things, I think particularly compared to other creative industries, I think we're doing really well. There was a piece of research a couple of weeks ago from the Advertising Association, which predicted double-digit growth for the media sectors in this year, and that's something that we would expect to see as well, because our members, from conversations that we're having with our members, they're now recruiting, they're in a more positive mindset, and they're actually able to learn a lot from the changes that have been taking place, whether that's, you know, saving costs on overheads, whether on rental property, or working more internationally. I think there are a lot of positives that the industry will be taking from this into its future.
Yeah, so there's a bright future ahead then.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good to hear. So do you have any like predictions for any trends for this coming year? I know you mentioned yesterday that you kind of focus on like ethics and diversity and that kind of thing. Could you tell us a bit more about that and anything else you expect to see this year?
Yeah, I think there are probably a few things to mention. We as a bit of background, we held a trends event which is available on YouTube. I'll put the link to it in the chat box, because it's a really good overview of where the industry could be going this year. But I think a couple of things came out of that were interesting. The one that really struck me was the expectation that there's going to be a continuing rise in the trend and the movement towards ESG, environmental, social governance, and just more ethical business. I think the expectations of the public and other stakeholders in how businesses should operate are increasing all the time, and I think that's going to be a really key issue for organizations and for brands going forward. I guess the big one from the PR point of view on that is really, how do we as PR professionals encourage our organizations to consider the societal issues that are taking place, and how can we help bridge that gap and help brands connect with their audiences. So I think ESG will be a really key one. Interestingly, on that, last year there was some interesting research which showed that in the first 4 months of last year, companies that subscribe to ESG values, and this was documented by the ESG S&P 500 index, and it showed that the companies that are subscribing to those values are actually outperforming all the other organizations and their competitive organizations. So what that shows is that there's a strong commercial case for doing the right thing by your stakeholders, as well as a strong moral one. So that's definitely something that we would expect to grow and to be more important this year. I suppose another interesting one that came out of that event was the changing model of a PR agency. I think we're certainly seeing more agencies spring up and work in a more agile way. So around about 50 agencies have sprung up since March last year. And that, I think, points towards a positive future for the industry, but it's also interesting to look at the way they're working. And the virtual model has really opened a lot of doors for international collaboration. There are people subcontracting work a lot more commonly. And obviously the fact that we don't all need to be, there's a widespread recognition of the fact that we don't all need to be in the office now all the time. I think it's really evolved the mindset around the agency model, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the year. But that's another trend I'd probably pick out for this year.
It's interesting you say about the virtual model and working internationally as well, because we've got somebody in our firm who is actually based, like we're all Manchester based, but she's based in Lanzarote. So, but that was before the pandemic that happened. But
yeah, lucky her.
I know. It makes us very jealous when we have team meetings and she's got a glowing tan and we're freezing.
Yeah. But on a serious note, though, it does show you how narrow we were in our thinking before this pandemic. I mean, we've got a similar situation. We've got staff members across the world. We've got colleagues in Argentina, Singapore, Dubai, and we had that before the pandemic. So I think we're in quite a strong position because we already had that international mindset. But even since then, I've got people who are in my own team who quite recently were working in Europe and Italy and elsewhere. So I think that will have a good impact on staff morale and on staff productivity, giving staff the flexibility to work where they want, but also it just fits in with where business is going, I think.
And do you think that might make it a bit more challenging for people like applying for jobs if they're going against an international market now?
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways you could look at it. You could say that it might make it challenging, but at the same time, it could open up from a kind of diversity and inclusion point of view. One of the arguments that's often leveled at the PR industry is that we're too London-centric, and that not enough is done to recruit and promote talent outside of London. I think I remember speaking to one of our senior members quite recently, and he was saying that like he now doesn't really care where someone works in the UK, and that just wasn't the case a year ago. And that's a large lobbying organisation, you know, typically centred in London and focused on Westminster, and now even an organisation like that is looking for talent everywhere. So ultimately, I think it's a good thing, and it just opens up doors and opportunities to more people.
Definitely, and it could be really good for us as the Northwest. Okay, great. So have you got any career tips that you could share with us? Obviously, you've had quite a successful and diverse career, so is there anything you would recommend to people?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things I would recommend. Firstly, I mean, I know it's spoken about a lot, but I think building your network is absolutely critical. Platforms that we've got at our disposal, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc., are a great way to kick off those conversations. But I think one of the things that's really important is for people to take the time to invest in building those relationships. So there's no point having 1,000 connections on LinkedIn if you don't really have a meaningful relationship with any of those people. So I'd really encourage anyone to reach out to senior stakeholders or people who they think would be useful to learn from, and just hit them up on LinkedIn or Twitter, send them an email, send them a message, and just ask, you know, for 15 minutes of their time, whether that's a coffee when we're back to real life or just a quick remote chat as we're doing now. I think one of the other things is that senior people are more available now than they've ever been. We've found that certainly with approaching speakers. We had a really great event with Alistair Campbell on mental health towards the end of last year. So we've been able to kind of get some high profile names that we maybe wouldn't have been able to before. And it's the same for people who are networking and building their own networks. You know, you shouldn't put a ceiling on who you approach. But so yeah, definitely invest the time in building a proper network gradually. And I guess another thing would be to do, and it's sort of related to that, is blogging. So I think it's really important, particularly in our industry, as we're focused on communication, to have somewhere where you showcase your work. And I admit I'm probably guilty of not following this advice myself, or as much as I should, but I think blogging is a really brilliant way of building those relationships, of putting yourself in the shop window and showcasing your skills to prospective employers. So, and it also is quite therapeutic and can help build your knowledge and expertise of certain areas. So the other thing is, like, you know, the industry generally is very supportive and very receptive to new people and new voices coming up. So certainly, if, you know, there's anyone who would be interested in having their blog published on the PRCA blog or shared on our channels, that's always something that we'd be happy to help with. And I know other senior industry stakeholders would be as well.
Brilliant. Okay. And you mentioned mental health there. You're doing quite a lot with mental health at the PRCA at the moment, aren't you? We
are, yeah. I mean, it's something that I think is always front of mind working in PR. We know from our own research that public relations and communications is amongst the most stressful professions that exist. So it was already a really key topic and a key policy for us, but I think the pandemic has accelerated the need for us to address it. We published some research last year in partnership with Opinion, which showed that 9 out of 10 practitioners have struggled with their mental health at some point. So I think that is not surprising. Yeah. But I think on the other hand, I think it's also good that we're having conversations, and that research also showed that there's been a big increase in the number of people being open and honest about their employers for taking time off for mental health. So there are positives to it, but I think a lot of it comes down to effective line management, giving people the space and the flexibility that they need to be able to do their work well, and also just acknowledging the fact that we're in a really, really stressful situation, and giving people the space they need to work through that.
Okay, brilliant. We've got some questions actually. So Natalie's asked, how can agencies best support new starters, particularly recent graduates who come on board when we're still remote working?
This is a really good question. Sorry if you can hear my two boys in the background.
It's okay.
But it's a good question and actually really relevant for us. We just brought on a new starter in our team, and it's been a real experience for us in terms of onboarding, and we've had to rewrite a lot of the old standard material that we would send to join us because everything has changed. I think the main thing to consider is that you need to be patient with the person who's joining. I think I would recommend that long before their day begins or their job begins, that you have a conversation with your senior team about how you can make that process as smooth as possible. Review your internal policies for new people coming into the company. How are they changed now that we're not physically present? So I would review all of those internal policies. And also for the line manager who's welcoming the new recruit, I think it's vital to really be extra patient with them and check in with them regularly, make sure that they have all the support that they need. And you have to also put yourself in their position and understand that it's going to be a very nerve-wracking time. My wife's actually just joined, well, she's in the same company, but she started a new role very recently. So I've seen firsthand how difficult it is to immerse yourself in a new organization without actually meeting anyone. It's a very unusual situation. So I think be patient, check in regularly, and also good to plug, there is also some training that we're developing to the PRCA to support agencies and organizations going through this. So we're developing best practice guidance on how businesses should do this, and that's something that we should be able to announce in the next month or two, because it's part of our Kickstarter program that we're also helping businesses with.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, we spoke as a NextGen committee about supporting people doing work experience at this time as well, because I know students are struggling to find anything like that. So we spoke about doing, you know, like bits of how-to guides or blogs and things like that. And it's just things, I suppose, small things, isn't it? Like how to use Teams or Zoom or something like that, and you know, make sure you're not on mute, and you know, just simple things like that that they've probably not really had a lot of experience on.
Yeah, I think especially for graduates, it's even harder, because a lot of the understanding that you get from that first role shapes skills that you take into your whole future. But of course, if you don't have those, then yeah, absolutely, I would concur with you on that. Yeah.
Okay, great. We've got another question as well from PR Agency One, and they're just asking, how do you recommend doing well in a PR interview? What areas of expertise do you think agencies value most highly?
So I think for entry-level positions or graduate positions, I think attitude trumps expertise. I think you need to be able to demonstrate that you have a real hunger and a passion to learn. I think one of the biggest things that you need to consider for an interview is thorough research on the organization. I think that's probably the number one gripe that those that are interviewing have with interviewees, is that they don't know enough about the organization, their landscape, the sectors they work in. So that's absolutely critical. So before any job interview, I would scour the website, make sure you have a strong understanding of the kind of clients that the agency represents, the challenges that they face, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and bring that into the conversation. So bring as much research as you can. There is no quick and easy way of doing it. It does take time, and you have to invest that time, but that's the price that you'll need to pay for making an impact. So I would definitely say, yeah, do your research and demonstrate a real passion for learning and self-improvement. A good way to do that is to, again, link back to what I was saying before about blogging. If you've got something that you can talk about, or a body of work that you can bring into the conversations you're having on an interview, that will always make an impact as well.
Okay, great. Okay, Natalie's asked, slightly off topic, but how did you find PR in the US compared to the UK?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And the strange thing is, at the time, I didn't have a strong UK comparison. I'd only done like a couple of internships. I hadn't worked properly. So it was my first proper role. I would say that the biggest role, or the biggest way it was different from the UK, certainly at the level that I was doing it, was that it was very tactically focused. So there was a lot of emphasis on giving clients numbers and massaging their ego and making sure that they were happy without necessarily thinking about the bigger business picture, which is something I think certainly now UK businesses and UK agencies are very well equipped to do, because a lot of the work that, you know, PR is a really powerful tool. It has the ability to shape how someone thinks, how they feel, how they act, and it needs an overall strategy to really permeate throughout the whole business. And my experience of working in the US was that wasn't necessarily a shared understanding. It was just about tactics, coverage, media relations, etc. So that was probably the biggest difference. Obviously, there were other differences. The language took some time getting used to as well, because there's a lot of basic terms which you think are relevant to a US audience, but they actually aren't. My wife's from New York, so I had a bit of practice with it beforehand.
Yeah. And it's just small things, isn't it? Like writing colour their way and things like that.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. I've got another couple of questions. So is there any ways you think agencies will have to adapt how they work with clients in a post-pandemic world?
Sorry, could you just broke up? Would you say that again?
Oh, sorry. Is there any ways you think agencies will have to adapt how they work with clients in a post-pandemic world?
Yeah, I think they will need to adapt. So first and foremost, businesses have been through a huge change in the way that they work, and I think that the business landscape itself has shifted massively. I mentioned ESG earlier. Another one we haven't touched on so far is kind of the general approach to diversity and inclusion, which kind of forms part of that. But all of these changes are happening around the world. So as PR professionals, it's our responsibility to be able to advise and educate our clients on these changes and how they fit in with the client's priorities. So there will absolutely be massive changes. Diversity that I was just referring to, for example, one of the challenges that we have in the industry is that we have a real stubborn lack of diversity, particularly around ethnic and racial diversity. And we see it as our mission this year to really build on a lot of the enthusiasm and momentum that was gained last year and ensure that that carries through into this year, into positive deliverable change. So there are lots of ways the world is changing, and I think it's our responsibility to kind of lead that change for our clients.
Okay, great. And we've got a question from Andy. He's saying, given the greater availability of senior individuals at present, are you finding that they are giving PR and comms strategies more time investment?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, the stock of PR stock and the respect that it holds in an organization is increasing. I think we've definitely seen that over the pandemic, there is a renewed appreciation for the value and the power of public relations. I think that's beyond question. I think partly for two reasons. Firstly, because invariably it was crisis communications teams helping organizations adapt to the immediate change that they faced back in March and April. But ultimately, I think we've also come a long way in helping businesses understand how important it is that they strike the right tone with their audiences. So we've seen time and time again organizations get it wrong and paying for that and paying the cost for that, whether it's a brand out of touch or trying to jump on the bandwagon for something that doesn't work. I think there is a real appreciation for the fact that PR is perfectly placed to help businesses connect with people. So that I think is critical. Last year, we also published research which showed that 76% of organizations have PR on the board. That's a positive step forward. And that was a survey with FTSE 500 organizations. So I think that's a positive sign. And if I'm being honest, when we run it in the summer again, I'd expect those numbers to increase for the reasons that I was just referring to. So I would say, yes, they are giving more time to comms and PR strategies because they recognize that it's delivering real value for the business.
Brilliant. Okay. Does anyone else have any more questions, or does anyone else have any anything they'd like to see from the NextGen? If you could let us know, or type something in the comment box, that'd be great. And then we will wrap this up if we don't have any more questions. Just conscious that it's lunchtime and you're probably all getting hungry.
Yeah, and thanks for all those questions.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was great to have a lot of interaction questions from people. I don't think there's anything else. No, nothing else has come through. So thank you very much for your time today. It was really, really interesting and really great to speak to you. And thank you for being the guest speaker for our first event for the relaunch.
It's a pleasure, Lizzie. Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone. And yeah, look forward to seeing you all soon in real life, hopefully.
Yeah, I hope so.